Okay, so I just went ahead and blended that coil into my clay. I'm just smoothing it, taking some time to smooth any wrinkles or dry spots and try to make it as uniform as possible. I could also use a damp sponge, not super wet, but damp, to kind of go around and smooth that down and make it nice and even. Just all these little things that a little bit more time and care can really help the craftsmanship of your project, making sure that it's as uniform as possible. While it's upside down, I can either do this now or at the end of the project, but let's get used to writing our name and our hour of our class. So I'm going to write my first name and at least the first letter of my last name. I am in hour 1, so I'm gonna write a 1. So really large so everyone can see, very readable, get in the habit so that nothing gets lost. I'm gonna carefully flip this over, make sure that it sets nicely with that foot there. And if it can hold its shape, which it looks like it can, I'm now gonna pay attention to the edges of it.
Attention, Elamir.
Okay, so now I'm gonna pay attention to the edges because they might be not as uniform as you like. There might be some that doesn't look very neat. And what I'm gonna do is I'm going to try to keep the shape of my form, so I don't wanna push down on the sides too hard. And what I do is I use my non-dominant hand to kind of cup underneath it, and then a damp sponge to soften those edges. Now the tough part is I really don't want to ruin my texture of my leaves in here, so I'm gonna have to be really careful not to rub down the center of it, and I'm just going along the very edge to smooth those down and to create a nice even, spin it, hold that edge up, focus on the very edge, not the texture, and smooth that down. So I'm not manipulating the form of the bowl, I'm just smoothing the surface clay so it's not so sharp. If you have a really sharp edge and it gets fired, it's actually going to be sharp enough that it's uncomfortable to use. And you don't want to get cut by it. So just running your finger along that edge and make sure it just has a little bit of roundness to it so it's not sharp when it gets fired. And you do this as long as you need to make it uniform and something that you really like and enjoy. You can manipulate the form if you need to, if it's kind of a little uneven, or if you need to press it down or pull it up, or just make sure that you have everything in place. The only trouble is the more you mess with it, the more you might take out some of that nice texture, and we definitely don't want to do that. So mine looks like a little bit more of a bowl right now, and so I'm thinking about how I can make this a spoon rest and have it be as functional. And I talked a little bit about when you place a spoon and how it can't sit there. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna think about how I can either cut a little spot for my spoon to rest in there, or create a divot where my spoon can sit down in. I'm looking at my texture and I'm thinking about where I want to kind of cover up my texture almost. So I really like this, and I like this texture, so maybe I'll create a divot right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same kind of technique where I hold my form, but I'm just going to press down. I can use my sponge. I'm going to kind of curl up the sides and press down here. I can get my finger a little bit wet, and I'm trying not to remove some of that texture. So I'm pressing down there and I'm pulling up on the sides, and you can kind of see I'm getting like a more of a spout where my spoon can then rest like that. And I want to touch it as little as possible to get the form that I like. The more you mess with it, the more it can just ruin that texture. So I want to make it count and get it exactly how I want it, and then don't touch it anymore. So I'm gonna leave that. I really like that form. I think my edges look really smooth and nice. I like the texture. So I'm gonna go ahead and call that done, and I'm gonna leave it just like that to dry out. Right now it's at a stage that's called leather hard, and it needs to dry out till it's bone dry, which means there's no more water in it, and so it's no longer cold to the touch. When it's warm to the touch and it's almost like gets a little ashy, then it's ready to fire. So I'm gonna set that aside, and I'm gonna look at my second one with my leaf in it here. I allowed the leaf to dry in the clay, kind of as an experiment to see if it works a little bit better.
At this time.
So I'm gonna go ahead and lift this up and see if my texture remains nice. Ooh, I really like that. I talked a little bit about not really loving this part right here, and so I'm thinking about just maybe curving it. I don't know why, I'm not a big fan of that, but I'm just gonna cut that off. See if I like this better. Just like that. I think that's pretty good. So now I have to create the foot on this. I'm going to create a little bit of paper towel so I can flip it over. It's a little bit rough and it needs a little smoothing out, so I'm going to take that damp sponge and smooth out my slab, because once I have that foot on it, I'm not going to be able to do it as easy. I have a little bit of coil from my last one. Since this is a bit smaller, I think I'm going to go for a little bit of a smaller coil. Here I am with all my tools in my way, just like I told you not to. Make sure that you roll the whole thing out and as even as possible, like that. I'm going to slip and score with my potter's needle. Think about where I want that foot to be, and do a little bit of an oval. And do some scratches, some scoring all the way around. I'm going to score on my coil. I'm not quite sure how long I need it. I'm gonna get some water on my fingers and put a little slip there. Now I'm gonna lay it score to score. I think the size of the coil is a lot smaller than my last one, but it seems more appropriate to the size of this form. Cut those off, blend together. This time I think I'm going to just leave the coil as is. I'm just going to press gently so that I make sure it stays. Once I have that done, I'm going to write my name and my hour. And I'm going to flip it over. I'm going to think about my edges. Now this, I actually want these kind of jagged edges, but I want these to look uniform just like my last one. So I'm just going to run the sponge, dip it in some water. If the sponge is too big, you could just use your finger to kind of curve those. It's not really making it a curve, but it's just softening that blunt edge to make sure it's not sharp and you can use it without getting hurt. smoothing it out here. I don't want to touch, I really like that leaf pattern, so I really don't want to touch that. So I'm focusing on just the edges. I can kind of shape it, like I kind of like how that goes off right there. Just using my fingers to smooth out around. And this one, I only curled up the edges of the leaf and I left this flat so that hopefully my spoon can rest right there. I'm a little concerned about that it's too small because it is going to shrink 10%, but we'll see. The other one's a little large, so. All right, and I'm gonna leave it right there. It is leather hard. I'm gonna wait for it to get bone dry. And here are my 2 spoon rests. I'm pretty happy with those.